With the fall sports season winding down, most teams are done in Utah Valley with the fall sports. So now the attention shifts to basketball and wrestling, which is just a couple of weeks away. Neil, how tough is it to make the transition from your fall sport activities to your winter sports if you play multiple sports?
Well, I think it's really tough because the football season is such a grinding season. You start in the summer, you got your two-a-days. Mentally you need a break. You're going to look and see what happens is, these teams that are going to play for a state championship are going to be playing, and then they're going to have basketball practice will have already started, and so they're going to have to go right to basketball with any break. And I just think it's a really tough go. I think everybody needs a couple of weeks off at least between seasons.
Well, I understand they don't really get any breaks anymore, Neil. You know that. They play through the summer. They play, particularly if you're a three-sport.
In August, they do get a break.
Well, if they're playing football, they don't, though, because they've got football practice. But
if
you're playing three sports, you don't get a lot of breaks anymore.
Not three.
If you're doing that, it just doesn't happen anymore. But I think it's actually an advantage in a lot of cases because a lot of times I've seen coaches talk about getting their players back into game shape, the players that don't play multiple sports. If you've been playing football, if you've been playing soccer or volleyball on the girls' side, or you're already getting into shape. You've got the wind, you've got the lung power, getting back into
but there's such different sports. There's no comparison to
being in good physical conditioning helps you. That's going to help you on all.
It helps, but that
you're not going to be perfectly prepared.
No, I understand that, but you can do that by practicing too. It's not something that you have to.
But there is a different level between being ready for practice and ready to play in a game.
I think it takes away from it when you're playing. You might be injured, you might be banged up. I just think your body needs a little bit of a break, and mentally you need a break. It's hard to go from such a long season, but in football's case, I think it is different if you finish early in football. If you don't make the playoffs, then you're okay. But these teams that make the playoffs or play for a state championship, my word, you're playing for a state championship on Saturday and you got basketball practice on Monday. I think that's tough.
Well, at least they get a couple of months though before the games that really count in region play, so they get some time.
Well, as we look at the state football semifinals, we have a pair of coaching staffs in Timpview and American Fork. Both have done a good job in getting their teams to the state semifinals. Jared, which has done a better job?
Well, I got to go with Timpview. Now, don't get me wrong. I think both teams are they're very lucky to have a lot of talented players, both sides of the ball. Pretty deep teams. Haven't really, in my opinion, they haven't really been hit with injuries very much. They've been relatively healthy. That helps a lot. But I got to give the nod to Timpview because they've just been so dominating this year. They get ready for every game. They haven't had a letdown since Spanish Fork. That's been the only one you could even consider a letdown, and that was just in the fourth quarter.
Well,
they dominated most of their games. I really like what the Timpview coaching staff has done throughout the year.
I think, you can't argue with that, really. Let's look at the way they dominated.
I'm right. I like it when you say that.
No, but wait a second. Let me just point out a few things about American Fork because, what Timpview's done is almost unprecedented. But what American Fork has done too, this team, they've struggled to get past the first or second round. They've had talented teams. This year they've been able to do that. They've been able to figure out offensively a good balance between offense and defense. I just like the way this team has come together. They did lose the Spanish Fork game, but they have had a few injuries. They had to play that game without their best player, and so I think
that's true. I forgot about that.
I think for American Fork to get to this point is probably more impressive than what Timpview has gotten to this point because we all know what Timpview had. They played in a bad region. Yes, they did dominate, but I think really 4A is down too. I think 4A.
I'd have to agree with you there.
What Timpview's been able to do in 4A is in a weird way not as impressive as what American Fork has been able to do in 5A.
Well, I see your argument, but let's give credit to both staffs. They've both had great years. Getting to the semifinals, anytime you can do that, that's a great season.
Well, and I think we said on this show, my memory's not very good.
I know that.
I know, we've talked about that. But I think we said on this show that Timpview and American Fork, you may have said Pleasant Grove, but Timpview and American Fork really had the best chances of any team to get to the finals. And
that's what's played out. That's what's played out. Okay, we've talked about the coaching staffs. We've talked about some of the games leading up to it. Neil, it's time for you to give me your keys for each team to win in the semifinals and reach the finals game. What's the key for each squad?
Okay, here's my first one for Timpview. Timpview just has to show up and make sure they catch the bus, Jared. That's their key. Don't miss the bus. Just make sure you show up, because I don't see really, I mean, yes, they could have a meltdown with turnovers. I think that's really the only thing that could keep Timpview from advancing, is if they had 4 or 5 turnovers. So that's Timpview. American Fork, my word, they have to quit their cheap shots, their personal fouls, their late hits, I don't know that's been an issue all year. If they can keep that under control, let that ground game do their thing, I really like American Fork.
Well, I agree with you in the Timpview game. Mountain Crest, great season, had a bit of luck getting through to the semifinals, I think, with the way they played.
No
and the only chance I see for Mountain Crest, if somehow they're able to score 14 or 21 quick points and get up 14, 21 to 0, because Timpview hasn't been in that situation. That's the only way I can see Mountain Crest having even a hope because even if they get turnovers, I don't know if they'll be able to score points against this Timpview defense. So that's the only way I see Mountain Crest having any hope at all. Timpview's, in my opinion, going to be able to walk through to the finals. American Fork has a bit more difficult challenge. Layton's been very good. We talked about them earlier in the year. They've been very good this season. Plus, you look at some of the problems that might stem from what happened against Hunter in that Hunter game. There could be some serious issues there. They have to get past that, focus just on the game, and no matter what happens, whoever's suspended, you have to leave them behind at this point, and get the ball to Chris Wernley. My goodness, with the way that line can block and the way he hits those holes, if he carries the ball a bunch of times, I like their chances against Layton.
Let me add one other thing about that. I think Wernley has to carry the ball more.
I agree.
I mean,
Absolutely.
we've seen them, give the other carries to some other backs. It's time for your best player to get the ball. If you're going to go down, you go down with giving him 20 carries.
Ride your horse. Ride your horse.
Not 10 to 12 to 15. He needs 20 to 25. Make sure, throw him some screen passes, get him the ball.
Make Layton stop him.
Yeah. Well, before we turn our attention to our picks and our final segment of the show, we must talk a little bit about volleyball, Jared. I know you were at the state 5A volleyball tournament where Lone Peak did it again. They won the state 5A title. Now is it time to talk about Lone Peak volleyball as a dynasty?
I think you have to. Look at what they've done over the last 5 years. 5 straight title games. 3 state championships. Now, 2 of those came in 4A before they moved up to 5A, but then winning it again this year. So 3 first-place finishes and 2 second-place finishes. How can you argue that that's not a dynasty-type performance? You do that in any other sport, and you're going to be called a dynasty. That's dominant.
I'm not. That is dominant, but it's not a dynasty. I'm not going to say. I think they're on the verge of becoming a dynasty, but you've seen that in a lot of other sports. You want to talk about dynasties, you talk about Brighton in swimming, or Delta in wrestling. I mean, there are schools that have won 10 in a row. I mean, they're complete dynasties where in high school sports where
Mountain View girls basketball and
track
back in the day.
I mean, those are dynasties. Yes, it is a lot more difficult to do in football or volleyball, in my opinion, but I just don't think it's a dynasty yet by the definition of what we've seen other teams do in high school sports.
Well, and it's tough because it's tough to compare apples to apples in that sense. Sometimes, different classifications, you get one program that's just, absolutely amazing.
And it's one 5A title, Jared. It's one 5A title.
They lost the last 2, and they went up against very, very good teams. But you look at what they've done, their body of work over the last 5 years, I think it has been as good as anybody in any sport in the last 5 years. They've been that impressive to me.
Well, and I think that we can talk in a couple more years. If they can keep it rolling, I mean, this is going to be a big year next year. I mean, they've clearly been dominant. If they can keep it going, then I'm going to join you. I'll agree with that.
Okay.